Thank you, Sister Minna. I will now introduce our third panelist, Sister Isra Veiva, who will be speaking about the Canadian Constitution. So Isra is in her third year at University of Waterloo, completing a double major in political science and law. Her long-term plans include working in the government to help to further the realm of Islam in Canadian culture. Isra is currently a co-president of the group Glory for Palestine, as well as an active member in the local Muslim community and an avid volunteer. Isra was born in Jordan, came to Canada at age 2, and has lived in Kitchener ever since. So if you could all direct your attention to Isra.
All right, so when discussing this issue and within the Constitution, the context of the Constitution, we have to discuss the Canadian democratic system. So I personally believe that the Canadian democratic system has evolved over time, and the best way I can explain this is through using the example that during the times of pre-Islamic Arabia, when polytheism was prominent, many people took objects and they would melt them and create their idols with them. So they would worship them, and this was done a lot with food, a lot with dates actually. And but when a famine occurred or a natural disaster, they would take pieces of their statue and this figure that they created to worship. They would take pieces of it and they would eat it, and over time it would become distorted or deformed, so there was no structure to it or no image anymore. And this, I feel personally, relates to our democratic system today in terms of human rights issues. I feel like we're enforcing people to choose between their religious beliefs and their citizenship, which is very much against Canadian values in total. I feel like what these bans are doing, or these attempts, are refusing accommodation to specific women who wear niqab in Canada based off of their cultural and religious beliefs, while at the same time stripping them of their fundamental rights, which includes being free to wear what they want to wear. I don't know if any of you have ever read the essay, The Rise of Illiberal Democracy. It was written in 1997 by Fareed Zakaria, and essentially what he argues is that what makes the governments in Canada, in North America, and in Europe at one point different than governments in the rest of the world is not democracy, but constitutional liberalism. And what that is essentially is it's a old Western tradition that protects an individual from the state that they live in or the society, any powers that are above them, and it essentially safeguarded any minority groups from what he calls the tyranny of the majority. And given that constitutional liberalism is, or it should be, the foundation of Canadian values and of our Constitution, I don't believe that any government, whether it's the Canadian government or the government in France or any courtroom, has the right to draw a line when it comes to anyone's religious identity. When we talk about, as mentioned last month, Mr. Kenney and his statements, I do believe that these statements were of ignorance, and he's instilling public fear in people, and he's doing it to easily stigmatize a minority. And this is wrong, and it's not a safe attitude for any foreign affairs minister to have, or any government, whether it's Canadian or not, to radiate if they're discussing democracy. But in terms of the bill, in Bill 94, it has not been passed yet, as mentioned. We heard Premier Jean Chériz. He said that the bill was created for reasons of identification, security, and communication. And then we hear last month Kenney stating that the niqab hinders verification and of the recitation of the citizenship oath. And these were publicly stated by 2 representatives of the Crown. But those were just the surface arguments. I've identified here 7 main arguments in defense of Bill 94 and people who do oppose the niqab. So the first one is that the niqab is not required in Islam, and most Muslims don't wear it. Well, this is an irrelevant argument, because the Supreme Court has affirmed that a religious practice is one that is subjectively connected to one's religion. So whether or not the practice is universal or required by any religious authority, no one, not the Canadian public, not the courts of Canada, have the right to determine whether or not a Muslim woman is allowed to wear it. Also, going with that is that each Muslim woman that for them to decide the extent of their obligation within the realm of their faith, their own faith. So argument 2 is that the niqab is a symbol of oppression and it undermines Canadian values. I find that this is also irrelevant, because unless a religious practice infringes on somebody else's, another individual's rights and freedoms, then the court, sorry, I need to drink some water, I'm all drying up. Excuse me. Then the court cannot pass judgment on it. And also, it's not up for anyone to decide, or to presume rather, what are the reasonings behind a woman wearing the hijab or the niqab without evidence, right? Unless it says otherwise. Argument 3 and argument 4 kind of go hand in hand. That the niqab could be used as a cover for criminal or terrorist activity, and that the niqab could pose a public security threat, especially when it comes in situations where identity is involved. So, as defined by the Supreme Court of Canada, accommodation will only exist to the extent that it is reasonable. So yes, niqabis will have to show their face for purposes of obtaining an ID card or a citizenship, etc. But there has been no recorded, as Mina has mentioned, there has been no recorded reports of a niqabi refusing to do so, nor has there been any recorded reports of somebody trying to disguise themselves by wearing a niqab in Canada. So I think this is very interesting, personally to me, because the system here in Canada is very much more reactive than it is proactive. We wait usually until a crime is committed to actually implement a law or to do something about it. So it's interesting that when it comes to niqab, it's a total different story. Argument 6 and 7 also go hand in hand. Immigrants should adopt the values of the society that they move from, and we should not accommodate the practices of people from countries that don't accommodate ours. So I feel like this is very contradictory to Canadian values completely, since the official policy of multiculturalism, which was adopted by the federal government about 40 years ago, does affirm that Canadians from other ethnic origins or national origins can participate in their own diverse cultural practices, as well as participate in Canadian society at the same time. So that just goes to show that we shouldn't, no authority has the right to say whether or not a woman should not wear her niqab. And then there is argument 8, which is that the niqab limits social integration within society. And to that I say, I mean, look, there's a niqabi sitting beside me right here, and mashallah, she's very involved in her community. She's very involved. That's something you have to be able to connect. And there's many niqabis out there that are very involved, and they're very active and social. So that's within itself. I disagree with that. But I find that these arguments seem to be more founded, to be more of an anti-Muslim sentiment than they are related to law or public policies. That's my opinion, but I don't think we should ignore the fact that these proposed legislations have singled out Muslims, and that, I mean, I disagree with the niqab, or we could, not like the niqab, hate it, but banning it is not part of our constitution. It goes against our constitution and our Canadian values. Thank you.